All right, this is video 26, the last of the videos on the relationship between argument and the people who give the arguments. And this is on ad hominem fallacies. These are the fallacies that are committed when you argue about people instead of evidence. And again, this is the important thing, that this only happens in certain contexts, in contexts where people are not presenting themselves as evidence or objects to be evaluated, right? So, the ad hominem fallacy is an argument which attacks the character or motives of a speaker in a situation where it is not relevant. And so there's one thing that I want to warn you against here. In online debates, frequently people start name-calling. If you're on social media, you're familiar with this. Back in the 90s, we called it a flame war. I don't think anyone's used the term flame war in easily 15 years. But inevitably, at some point during this, when people are exchanging insults, someone will accuse someone else of committing the ad hominem fallacy, which is, and in that context, that's just a fancy Latin way of saying you insulted me. I think there's more. I know there is more going on to the ad hominem fallacy than it simply being a Latin phrase you can trot out when you feel like you've been insulted. So let me just talk again about the relationship between character and argument. Whenever we are talking with someone, we are constantly evaluating how much we like and trust them. This is what Kahneman called a system one process. It's operating in the background. Do I like you? Do I trust you? A huge amount of our cognitive apparatus as a social species, right? We evolved in a different way than the other apes because we cooperated in really fancy ways using language. And that involved constantly evaluating whether we like and trust the people around us. And like most System 1 processes, this constant character evaluation is adaptive and good in most situations. But it does mean that it impacts our beliefs more than an evaluation of evidence. So actually the number one way beliefs spread is by being held by people you like and not on the basis of evidence. And we just have to deal with this as a part of our cognitive, what evolution gave us. This is why, most religion is inherited, right? It's in my discipline, philosophy, we argue till we're blue in the face about the existence of God, but most people will say yes or no to the existence of God just based on how they were raised. And that's because we accept the beliefs of the people that we like our parents. And if we don't like our parents, we tend to reject their religion. But look, this leaves us vulnerable to salesmen. The world is full of people who will exploit the fact that they're likable to make you believe dumb things. And this is the main thing that, this is a big thing that any critical thinking course should warn you against. So whenever possible, evaluate evidence, not people. All right. In this context, I had you look at a video by Jay Smooth, a YouTube personality that I am fond of, about how to tell someone what they did was racist. And you'll watch the full video yourself. But the basic lesson is to remember the difference between the what they did conversation and the who they are conversation. So someone says something strikes you as racist. You want to focus on what they said and not what they did. I think I'm using the same gestures that Jay Smooth does. What they said and not who they are. Who they are is a quagmire. They'll immediately say, I don't have a racist bone in my body. Well, of course you do. We all do. But that's not even the point. The point is that it's almost impossible to look into someone's soul and decide whether they are racist. What you can do is look at what they did and see whether that was racist. Keep the focus on the action. So I mention this because this isn't just a lesson for racism. This is a lesson for a lot of critical thinking. Focus on the action, not on character. And you will be focusing on something, a problem that you can deal with better. Another way this comes up sometimes, especially in the context of offensive remarks, is to talk about impact rather than intent. That is to say, someone says something offensive, they misgender someone who's using, they use the wrong pronouns for someone. And they say, well, I didn't mean to. And then people say, well, we want to focus on impact that hurt someone's feelings rather than intent. The reason we do that, for the most part, is that it's just really difficult to look into someone's soul and decide what their intent was. Now, personally, I think that this impact over intent thing can be taken too far. There are many circumstances in which you have to evaluate intent. A court of law. For almost any crime, the intentional version of the crime is worse than the accidental version, right? And that's an interesting cultural universal, actually. All across human cultures, people recognize that intent matters for culpability in some contexts. But if you can avoid talking about people's character or their intent, do it. Conversations about character are quagmires in ways that conversations about evidence are not. If a real philosopher were watching this, someone might argue with me, but I'm going to stand by that. I want to talk about this in reference to 12 Angry Men, because one of the things that happens in 12 Angry Men is that Henry Fonda brings out what an asshole juror number 3 is. He provokes him into showing that he's a bully. He consistently tricks him into contradicting himself. He's like Socrates that way. And this turns the jury against number 3. I want to emphasize that whether or not juror number 3 is an asshole has nothing to do with the simple factual question of whether the boy stabbed his father. So what that means is that you need to, when possible, distinguish the question of evidence from the question of character. And so this is my little flowchart. Should you make it personal? If you should make it personal because someone is saying you should accept something on their authority, for instance, a public health official saying that you need to stay inside, then you need to evaluate their credentials as an authority. If you make it personal when you shouldn't, that's when you are committing an ad hominem fallacy. And so I think in a very subtle way, Henry Fonda is doing an ad hominem argument throughout 12 Angry Men when he manipulates people into betraying themselves, contradicting themselves, that sort of thing. Because it's not actually relevant to the question of the boy's innocence or guilt. All right. So an ad hominem fallacy is an argument which attacks character or motive in a situation where it's not relevant. And I want to bring out this contrast between situations where it's relevant and situations where it's not by looking at an example. Here's a little dialogue. Imagine Monica says, "I'm thinking about buying stock in Acme because it was recommended by the host of the TV show Screaming Money." Brad replies, "I don't think that's a good idea. He's invested a lot of his own money in that stock, so his advice can't be trusted." Monica is giving an argument from authority. She is saying she's going to do something because a host of a TV show said she should. Brad is legitimately questioning the reliability of that authority. And in fact, pretty much anyone who gives stock advice in public is, in one way or another, just running the scam of pushing penny stocks, right? You tell people to buy a stock because you've already bought it. It goes up in price. You sell. And then after that, your audience sells. You make money. So this is a legitimate situation for talking about someone's character. Here's another example. "I support organic farming because it's better for the earth." You know who else supported organic farming? Hitler. Which is true, by the way. Hitler, the Nazis had a kind of environmentalism. But, of course, Monica didn't say, "I support this because Hitler said so." She just said, "I support this because it's good for the earth." And there's a whole separate issue about, the role of pesticides in things like 15 years ago when Toledo lost drinkable water for several days because of an algae bloom in the lake. That was because, there are empirical issues around organic farming. None of that comes up with, who else who supported organic farming? Hitler. So the Hitler example has been around forever as an example of a bad argument. Back in 1981, there was a columnist. He's still around, but in the 80s, I thought he was hysterical. Also in 1981, I was 13. Dave Barry. This is from his article, "How to Argue Effectively." "I argue very well. Ask any of my remaining friends. I can win an argument on any topic against any opponent. People know this and stay clear of me at parties. Often, as a sign of their respect, they don't even invite me. You too can win arguments. Simply follow these rules." And what is one rule? Compare your opponent to Hitler. Right? And if you spent time online, you know this. It's Poe's law, I think. If any conversation goes on long enough, someone will bring up Hitler, and at that point, the argument, the whole conversation has become futile. Sorry, I just checked. That's Godwin's law. Poe's law is that it's impossible to parody anything because someone will have already said what your parody view seriously. Godwin's law was the one I'm thinking of. But in any case, it's the argument ad Hitlerium. And it is the worst kind of ad hominem fallacy. Although it's worth noting that even Godwin has stated explicitly that in the era of Trump, Godwin's law doesn't apply. All right, so we're talking about ad hominem fallacies. They attack the character or motives of a speaker in a situation where it is not relevant. Ad hominem arguments are legitimate when an argument from authority has been given. Ad hominem arguments are also legitimate when the conclusion is a statement about a person. So if there's a presidential election, character matters. So anything that might have otherwise counted as an ad hominem argument is legitimate because, you don't know how what every issue the president's going to face is, and you have to judge their character to figure out what they're going to do. So again, we want to avoid making things personal if possible, but in plenty of situations, it's not. There are subtypes of ad hominem fallacies that are that you need to know for the test. The three subtypes are ad hominem abusive, ad hominem circumstantial, and ad hominem tu quoque. The ad hominem abusive is just straight name calling, right? So, you believe in Hawking radiation? Stephen Hawking was a total publicity whore. Therefore, it can't possibly be true that black holes radiate energy. Right, just attacking Stephen Hawking for his to discredit his scientific finding about black hole radiation, that's an ad hominem abusive. Ad hominem circumstantial is where you attack the motives of the person giving the argument. Fracking is dangerous. Warren Buffett only advocates fracking because he's heavily invested in natural gas. Again, if someone has given an argument from authority, the circumstantial argument, ad hominem, just is questioning someone's bias, which is legitimate. So if someone said fracking is safe, because Warren Buffett says so, then you could say, well, he's heavily invested in natural gas. But if someone says fracking is if someone says that fracking is safe and cites evidence, then talking about Warren Buffett is an ad hominem circumstantial. The final one is ad hominem tu quoque. And this is defending yourself by saying that someone else has the same problem. So, for instance, if someone says, I can't believe you think that what I said is racist. You're racist. In modern internet terms, the ad hominem tu quoque is called but whataboutism, because people will say, but what about? And then talk about someone else. It's a way of changing the topic. Oh yeah, I'm racist? Well, but what about what this other guy said? And there's a nice John Oliver video about but whataboutism that I'm making you watch. He points out that it's like trying to defend yourself in a jury trial by saying, well, other people have committed murders. Oh yeah, sure, I may have killed someone, but what about Jeffrey Dahmer? Right? So some examples. I don't think the state should recognize gay marriage. Marriage is for the production of children. Response: what kind of bigot are you? That's just a straightforward ad hominem abusive. Rather than talking about the issue, for instance, whether the state in other circumstances would sanctify marriages that don't lead to children, Brad has just resorted to name calling. My priest says homosexuality is a sin, and he can list many parts of the Bible that back him up. I just feel like gay marriage is something I can't approve of. Reply: your priest is probably a closet case. All those anti-gay priests are. Again, Brad has made it personal in a situation where it shouldn't be. It's an ad hominem, it's just an accusation of hypocrisy. It's not even, I guess you could say it's ad hominem circumstantial, but it's not working because he's not addressing the evidence or issues of Bible interpretation, for instance. So I want to close by looking at one more kind of ad hominem fallacy, and I think this is kind of the reverse ad hominem fallacy. So imagine a three-way debate. Donald Trump says hydroxychloroquine can cure COVID-19. I think we should stock up on it. Monica, the Trump family has a financial stake in companies that make that drug. He's not a reliable source of medical information. This would be a legitimate accusation of bias. After all, Steve has given an argument from authority, and Monica is replying by asserting the authority is biased. Brad comes back and says he's more than unreliable. If Trump says it works, then you know it doesn't work. You might be tempted by this. But actually, Trump's speech is irrelevant to whether or not the drug works. To evaluate whether the drug works, you need to look at the evidence. All right, so to sum up the 3 videos in this section, we believe things because people tell us to believe them, and this is necessary and good. When people tell us to trust their authority, we need to evaluate their authority by asking some questions, at least 3 questions, maybe 6. A lot of times, though, the way people radiate authority, rather than helping us find good evidence, creates biases in us. So we also need to be aware of authority bias. This is where trappings of authority convince us to believe things, even though no real argument from authority has been given or could be given. Finally, we want to avoid making things personal as much as possible, right? Have a conversation about what someone did, not who they are. Have a conversation about the evidence. Don't insult people. And, don't think that saying that one person committed a crime somehow absolves someone else from doing it. All right, so that's the last video for this section, and there's a test and a review sheet for it, and I will do a walkthrough video for that test.